Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where people get revenge on those who've wronged them. And in today's episode, guys, OP's evil teacher tries to teach OP a lesson, and OP ends up destroying the guy. I hope you enjoyed today's super satisfying stories. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this event takes place around 1985. At the time, my wife and I were working as managers in this apartment complex, as I was attending college. For the 112 units, we had 120 parking spaces. This is important later. And because of limited parking, all residents were required to display a parking permit. Cars without a permit could be towed at the owner's expense. And due to the shortage of spaces, we allowed residents and guests to use the office parking after hours. The previous management team didn't pay much attention to the parking situation. So after time, it was pretty apparent that one resident was using the property as a parking lot for his illegal used car business. Weekends, when the office was closed on Sunday, we would often experience a door knock from a resident that had no place to park because their assigned space was occupied. We would have to canvass the property, and a huge portion of the time, the offending vehicle belonged to one person, and it was never the same car twice. We'll call him the used car guy, and he was running this illicit business, using the complex parking as a showroom. So my wife and I needed to do something about this. We came to the complex with a very early PC called a Commodore 64 that we owned. When we were ready, we included a notice with the rental receipts, notifying everyone that new permits are required for vehicles, and vehicles without a permit would get a warning tag and then towed on a second offense. We also issued apartment-specific passes, so residents could place a temporary permit on a guest dash, and we as managers would know where to go if there was a problem. Knowing it would take time for people to get used to this, we initially allowed 2 warnings before a tow, and we kept track of everything in the computer database. The parking situation rapidly and greatly improved until we took our annual vacation. So on the first year, we come home to an answering machine full of "I have no place to park" messages. The stand-in managers arranged by the property left the property daily after office hours, and that's when the used guy took full advantage. On the second year, we did something completely different. We went on vacation, and our return date happened to be on a 3-day holiday weekend. So we come home around 9 p.m. on Sunday evening. I fired up the computer and went to check the parking because there was a fair number of vehicles out there parked along the curbs, displaying a resident parking permit. As per the year before, there was a large number of unmarked cars on the property, 19 of them. All were in assigned parking spaces. So at 1 a.m., we called the tow truck company. I told them that we had several vehicles that needed towing, and they asked how many. I told them 19, and it was dead silence on the phone for about 10 seconds. The guy then asked, did you say 19? I tell him, yep, that's what I said, and the guy says, give me some time to get things organized, and we'll be there as soon as we can. At about 3 a.m., 6 tow trucks show up, 5 flatbeds and a hook. It took them 2 trips. And remember, this is also a holiday weekend, so we were closed Monday. On Tuesday morning, the used car guy's waiting for the office to open, and he says to me, "Why did you tow my car?" I respond, we towed 19 cars. Which one was yours?" He then just grumbled and left, and it turns out 18 of them were his. Yeah, all 18. Each one got charged storage for Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and also the hookup fee for each car. We also talked to the tow truck company, and while they couldn't be specific what the total cost was for the guy, they could tell us the cost they charge as a business, and we could figure it out by ourselves. The yard fees worked out to 3-day storage, which was $75 a day, and the $75 hookup fee for each of the 19 cars, which ended up costing $5,400 for 18 cars. But there's more. So in California, where this took place, by law, impound yards can only release a vehicle to the registered owner. The used car guy was flipping these cars, which meant that he was using the title signed by the previous owner, and no stated value on the title. None of these cars were legally registered to him. He had to go to the DMV and transfer ownership of each of these vehicles with the attendant fees, taxes, etc. Taxes because he wasn't a licensed dealer. Now, we have no idea to this day how much it cost him to get all the cars out of the impound, but the tow truck company confirmed that he did so. So just for giggles, $5,400 in 1985 is the equivalent of a few cents short of $20,000 in 2022 for the impound fees alone. So with registration fees and taxes in California multiplied by 18 cars, he probably paid nearly the same $50 for $100 to get the cars registered, just so the impound would release them. So my guess is somewhere around $40,000 total in today's money. Over the next 2 years, we no longer had issues with the used car guy. So yeah, some people are just too darn entitled, guys, and it serves the guy right, and him having to pay all those fees is 100% karma for trying to operate a business the sleazy way by illegally using someone else's property. Okay, so this is not a story of righteousness, kindness, justice, or virtue that many people love so much. This is a true story of merciless, relentless, selfish, vindictive vengeance. So some years back, I stepped into an exam hall and I got seated and all, waiting for it to start. It was a tertiary level examination, which made what happened next worse. So as everybody took their seats in the exam hall, the standard announcement came that no one's allowed to leave the exam hall as it began. While writing the exam, I start noticing that my pen was dying. It was running out of ink, so I unscrewed it and checked, and it was. So I immediately raised my hand and got the attention of the nearest invigilator. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's usually people hired to make sure that students don't cheat during an examination. This was a teacher who knew me. I took one of his classes, and I often played games or slept in them as I already learned what he was teaching elsewhere. By some rules, I still had to attend the class and exam. Now, the guy had tried to humiliate me a few times before by asking me questions when I wasn't paying attention, but I managed to answer them correctly. I was otherwise never rude to him or made things difficult. So I basically called him and said, "Hey, my pen's out of ink, can I borrow a pen for the exam?" And his reply, while chuckling, was, "Huh, you came to an examination without a pen? Like, why did you bother to come at all? Don't take the exam." Now, I also want to note that he was not saying it with some stern look. The guy had a slight grin on his face. I glared at him reflexively because I wasn't in a mood for jokes, the exam stress, and the lack of sleep. I tell him my pen ran out of ink and I forgot to replace it. I didn't know. And he says, "So whose fault is it that you came unprepared? Is it my fault? Why don't you just forget to take the exam as well?" I can only continue to glare at him as he gave me a smug look. There was like 100 people in that dead silent exam hall, and all of them were staring at me. I was also well aware of the exam rules in the institute. Any attempt to communicate with another student will be considered cheating, and you will be escorted out immediately, and those rules were strictly enforced. I couldn't just turn around and ask my buddy for a pen. I needed permission to borrow that pen, and he knew it. So I asked him again for permission to borrow a pen to take the exam. And the teacher's response was, "No, it's your own fault. You were careless. You're so smart, right? So take the exam without a pen." Now, to better illustrate what possessed me to such extreme measures later, it was my last paper, and also my hardest and most important paper. I hated the subject, but I pushed myself both physically and mentally to ace it. I was going 72 hours without sleep after 2 weeks of exams. I was at my weakest and most stressed out moment, but I mustered my remaining strength to take this paper. And there this guy was, smirking right at me with every ounce of mockery he could possibly show. He was basically stepping on all my hard work in front of all my friends and other students, showing everybody how helpless I am. He wanted to ruin my academic progress while he looks right at me and enjoying it. All because of what? I wasn't paying attention in his class? So I sat there with the exam script with no pen, looking like an idiot. I then looked at him, figuring it was time he would stop this cruel joke and let me borrow a pen. And that's when he widened his smirk and tilted his head in a manner towards me, as if saying, "What are you going to do about it?" Not only was he serious about not letting me borrow a pen and making me get a 0 for the paper, the guy was provoking me to make a scene right on the spot and get myself into trouble. He didn't just refuse to allow me to borrow a pen, he genuinely intended to inflict severe harm and humiliation on me while enjoying it. But in a great feat of self-control, I didn't snap. At this point, I was fuming, and my face was red hot from anger and exhaustion, but I composed myself and evaluated my options calmly. So I ignored him, raised my hand again, and waved at the next nearest invigilator, until one came over, and she allowed me to borrow a pen. Now, was it my fault that I didn't make sure my pen had ink for an exam or bring extras? For sure it was. But did I deserve to be deliberately humiliated like that? I don't think so. Thankfully, that was my last paper, and with all the rage coursing through me, it was really hard to focus. Immediately after the exams, I only had one clear goal in mind: to destroy that man. Did I think he was a bad teacher who shouldn't be educating the youth of my nation? Totally. But I'm not gonna give you some pretentious, righteous crap to justify my actions. I didn't give a care in the world who he was gonna educate next. I just wanted to inflict an immense amount of pain and suffering to him because all I could feel was a burning desire for revenge for what he did to me. And I didn't care if it was through his career or otherwise. I went all out, legally though. I'm a law-abiding citizen. And also, one thing I never did do for revenge was involve my parents. They held high positions in government institutes, and I was sure some action would have been taken if they made a complaint on my behalf. And to be honest, because I knew it was a personal vendetta and not a legitimate concern that required the assistance of my parents, I felt that if I did, I would just become the stereotypical spoiled brat relying on the influence of my parents. So the first thing I did was speak to my primary lecturer and complain. I articulated my injustice to her as firmly as I could, and I made it clear that I would pursue this matter all the way. She reassured me that she would make things right. And guess what? He made a joke out of it. He said it was my fault for being careless and he just wanted to teach me a lesson, and he would have let me borrow a pen later on. Despite my objections, she made me drop the complaint. I then went on to speak to the head of the department and even the dean of the faculty, shooting strongly worded complaint emails about unprofessional behavior unbecoming of a teacher in this fine institute. Left, right, and center. Eventually, the ruckus I made culminated in a meeting between myself, the dean, and my mortal enemy, who painted a story of how I was this evil, troublemaking student who constantly disrupts his class, and that he had tried in all his holy patience to educate in vain. But he never gave up on me because he's such a great educator. Also rubbing in my face that I was being extremely immature for something that was my fault. Sticking to a story of how he was just trying to impress on me so that I wouldn't be careless for important things in the future, and that he would have let me borrow a pen anyway. In the end, the dean sided with him, and since I was allowed to take and pass the exam anyway, no further action was to be taken. I was then forced to shake his hand while he gave me that smug smirk, which he knows I know what it meant. Now, it was always a long shot to go through the system. I knew his actions seemed mild, and it was by his actions that he was judged and given a pass. But it wasn't his actions that drove me. I wouldn't have harped on it if he was just being strict or simply had a wicked way of imparting a life lesson. It was because I saw the true intentions of pure malice behind his actions that I wouldn't forgive him. Now, I'm betting by now that some of you are wishing the story ends here, and that I was defeated without fulfilling my evil plans. Well, too bad for you. So the holidays begin, and I devoted extraordinary effort to finding a way to defeat my nemesis. I was a man of focus. I read up on exam rules, school guidelines, Ministry of Education Code of Conduct for teachers, which I somehow obtained, and even spoke to lawyers. There was no opening in the opponent's defense, and I wasn't ready to admit defeat. Such was my thirst for vengeance. So I had to think outside the box. So I decided to go through his Facebook profile. Years of it, thousands of photos and comments meticulously. He was a married man with kids, and most of his content was beyond reproach. The guy made a few slightly suggestive comments at female students' pictures, but nothing that would get him in trouble. He also had some photos of being drunk, but nothing that violates the Ministry Code of Conduct. I then Googled his phone numbers and emails, and I ran them through every search engine I knew, again and again. Pages upon pages of boring stuff at car forums, trade listings, property sales. I checked them all. And then came one mundane-looking forum post with his personal email. Something about asking for contacts, and I must admit that I was about to call it quits as I clicked. As I read the context of that forum post, fire from the depths of hell burned in my eyes. Metaphorical horns sprouted from my head, and I gave out a cliché maniac laugh. You see, my nemesis had made one fatal mistake, and I found it. That forum, despite its random-sounding URL, was a forum to discuss and advertise prostitution. And his post asking for contacts was in response to a review to some office lady escort. And I'm thinking, bingo. He made the mistake of using his personal email there. It was fairly recent, and upon closer inspection, there were multiple such posts and many reviews posted by the same user. It looks like my nemesis was one unfaithful, philandering prick. I found a vital opening and prepared to strike. But I reasoned I had to be thorough, like anyone could have posted his email. Heck, he could accuse me of doing it. Between the words of a squeaky clean family man teacher and a student with a well-profiled grudge against him, my odds weren't that good. I had to shackle him to that account publicly, and let it be the proverbial stone that sinks him. So I contacted this local news website. It reported on sensational social news, such as neighbors caught physically fighting on videos, nutjobs hurling vulgarities randomly in public, etc. However, it got some uniformed personnel in trouble when they were photographed sitting on seats in the metro, reserved for handicapped and pregnant passengers, so you could see why I chose them. They were enticed by the possibility to do an expose on a teacher of one of the nation's famed institutes, and they agreed to meet with me. Expectedly, they had concerns about the legitimacy of that teacher's ties to the account before they would publish it. I told them of a plan to bait him into using his mobile number to identify himself as the owner of the account. Now, they were reluctant initially, but after reading the explicit contents of his reviews in the account, I convinced them that it was their journalistic obligation to expose him. So we cooperated and implemented a plan. I had factored the possibility that he would have used a second number for this perverted hobby that couldn't be tied to him, and all of my efforts would have been for nothing. But after scrutinizing his behavior, I felt it was more likely that he only used one number and deleted incriminating messages. And I was right, and that mistake would cost my mortal foe dearly. So without going into details, the enemy fell into my trap. Hook, line, and sinker. The guy SMS'd the number that we had prepared and confirmed that he was the owner of the username from that forum. The day of reckoning came when the story came out, and I landed my figurative death blow to my mortal foe. He never knew what hit him. My only regret is I wasn't there to see his face when it did. It was still the vacation, and the URL to that story spread around, and it had his face, name, and screenshots of his user account reviews, and the SMS messages tying him to it. It wasn't headlines or anything, but as far as the school was concerned, it was pretty bad. His Facebook account was closed down, and he couldn't be reached for comments, but it was too late. The website had all they needed. I'll never forget that delightful afternoon. I shed so much tears of sadistic joy just reading all the online comments calling for his blood. Many students also came out, speaking against his teaching ethics. Words like pervert, disgrace, disgusting, and fired were thrown about in this sweet symphony. As the enemy fort lay ablaze in ruins, I stood atop admiring my hard-fought victory. And although words fail to describe the feeling, can you feel it just a little, my dear readers? By the time the new semester began, he was gone like the wind. He became a hot topic for everyone to gossip, including the teachers, one of whom told us that he was going through divorce. Now I know, I could have let go of what happened that day in the exam hall, been the bigger man, yada yada yada, but I'm not that man. I'm a man who will willfully choose the satisfaction of vengeance over virtues, and I got a teacher fired. And I, unashamedly, unapologetically admit it felt so good. But I wasn't done. I remembered when he humiliated me and then rubbed it in my face at my most helpless moment. There was one last thing I had to do. To text him. So I text him, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, I understand now the importance of the lesson you were trying to teach me. If only you heeded your own words. It's your own fault for being careless." I never got a reply. Man, I just want to say that is god-level pettiness on OP's part that led to a nuclear destruction of a teacher's career. And I get it, okay? The teacher was trying to teach OP that you always need to be accountable for your actions, and it's your fault for not being prepared, yada yada yada, but he didn't have to be such an a-hole about it, guys. And if he wasn't such an a-hole, he might have still had a job. So yeah, the moral of the story is, if a student needs a pen, just give them a pen. So in secondary school, I was tormented by one specific person. For years, I was beat up and publicly humiliated on a daily basis. One time, he gave me a concussion and broken ribs, and the guy never faced consequences in school because his family was very rich and he was pretty popular. For some context, I live in a pretty small town in England, so everybody knows everyone, including the guy. He left the school when I was 17, and I didn't see him for about a year. Around this time, I got way more popular and started going to parties and making more friends. And annoyingly, he was friends with some of my friends, and his girlfriend was at my school, but I managed to avoid him mostly until finishing school. Unfortunately, I saw him a few months later. Me and my friends went to the pub to celebrate the exam results, and the guy was a complete a-hole to me. He starts insulting me, mocking me to my friends, saying, "Why do you hang out with him? I'm way better." He also brought up a bunch of stuff from years ago, and at one point, he put me in a headlock, and he told me that my friends only hung out with me out of pity. Now, I wasn't going to take it, but I also wasn't going to get into a fight because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of getting me angry, and right at that moment, I overhear the perfect thing. So the guy was bragging to his friends about a house party he was having after, and talking about all the drugs he was going to take to the party. And the guy said he had it all in his car. Now, it wasn't just a bit of weed. The guy was bragging that he had 13 bags of coke, 30 pills of MDMA, and 7 or 8 grams of ketamine. I then knew what I would do for my revenge on the guy. So as he was leaving, I followed him to his car and I took a photo of his number plate. And then after he was driving off, I walked off and called the police. Now, I knew they needed something more than hearsay to stop the car, especially because I didn't want to be traced back to it, so I told the police that I just saw a guy snorting a white powder in the pub toilets, and then get into a driver's side of a car. I then provided them with the license plate of the car and told them the direction they were heading in. Honestly, I didn't think they were going to stop him, or maybe they would just ask him questions later and ruin his party. But the driving on drugs allegation, plus the fact that he had been arrested for minor possession before, which I didn't know at the time, was enough for police to take it seriously. They stopped him, searched his car, which at that point they found all the drugs he was transporting to his party, and he got arrested for it. The consequences of his arrest meant that he lost out on going to university. His rich parents had also had enough of his behavior, so they kicked him out and cut him off from their funds. A rumor I also heard was that in return for a lower sentence, my bully ratted out his supplier, which in result got him punished. And now he has to wear a colostomy bag. And that, plus his criminal record, means that he's currently unemployed. Well, I'm just gonna say that this is exactly what the idiot gets, guys. Like, I can't stand bullies, and to read that OP got revenge on someone who tormented him and picked on him throughout his school years is a win. A pretty crazy win, but a win nonetheless, right? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's super satisfying stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/ entitled People episode, where a psycho Karen grandma hates her granddaughter and just sells her for money. It's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.